Thank you, Chairman Kucinich, Ranking Member Issa, for working with me and others to get this series of hearings here in front of the committee. I would also like to thank Secretary Paulson for coming before the committee today, and I look forward to, I think we all look forward to his testimony in the few hours we get to spend here with him. The fall of 2008 was a watershed time for our economy. Our economic challenges were felt the most by the millions of Americans who lost jobs, saw savings shrink, and their credit tighten. Unfortunately, the approach taken by the federal government, I believe, is dangerous, and I think many Americans would argue has not helped. Federal bailouts and federal stimulus packages are transforming our free market economy into a political economy. The federal government now selects the winners and the losers. The current issue before this committee is merely a symptom of the ever-increasing reach of the federal government into the everyday affairs of American businesses and American families. Should anyone be surprised by the way the federal government has administered the bailout program? With the $1 trillion at their disposal, little guidance and oversight, we have seen Treasury and the Federal Reserve behave in a way that can only be described as unprecedented. The evidence is clear. The federal government has used threats, intimidation, and I believe deception to impose growing command and control over our economy. With the increasing nationalization of everything from banks to car companies, runaway federal spending and deficits, higher taxes, government takeovers of energy, and potentially health care, all while the economy is deteriorating even further and more American jobs are being lost. The American people are saying enough is enough, and the American people want answers. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Paulson about his role in these dealings, and would yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your statement. We turn now to our witness, Henry M. Paulson. Mr. Paulson served as the Secretary of the Treasury from 2006 to 2009, January 2009. He previously served as the Chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. It is committee policy, Mr. Paulson, that we swear our witnesses in. Will you please stand and raise your right hand?
Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, let the record reflect that he answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. So, Mr. Paulson, you may begin.
Okay. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and distinguished members of the committee. I served as Secretary of the Treasury from July 2006 to January 2009. During my tenure, the world experienced a financial crisis unprecedented in our lifetimes. The crisis presented a relentless series of novel challenges that required swift, innovative, and dramatic responses. Had the crisis of 2008 been left to unfold without strong federal reaction and intervention, the world of 2009 would look very different from the world we live in today. Many more Americans would be without their homes, their jobs, their businesses, their savings, their way of lives. The crisis of confidence last fall threatened to disrupt our entire financial system, not just the institutions that had high credit losses on their mortgage investments, but all financial firms, whether weak or solvent. As liquidity dried up, the continued collapse of financial institutions that provide credit and handle payments would have meant in short order that firms across industries, not just Wall Street but every street, would have seen a massive curtailment of access to financing needed to purchase supplies and pay employees. Missed payrolls would have quickly turned into even more millions of layoffs, and this in turn would have meant an even greater retreat of consumer spending. It would have been extremely difficult to break the momentum of this downward spiral. Now that the financial system is stabilized, we can and should take the time to learn the lessons of the past. In the midst of a rapidly changing crisis, our responses were not perfect, but I am confident that they were substantially correct and that they saved this nation from great peril. This hearing is about Bank of America, and in my prepared testimony, I lay out the series of events surrounding its acquisition of Merrill Lynch. There are three issues that are appropriate to address at the outset of this hearing. First, Some have opined that I and other government officials allowed concerns about systemic risk to outweigh concerns about potential harm to Bank of America and its shareholders. That simply did not happen. In my view, and the view of numerous government officials working on the matter, the interests of the nation and Bank of America were aligned with respect to the closing of the Merrill Lynch transaction. Second, some have suggested that there was something inappropriate about my conversation of December 21st with Mr. Lewis, in which I mentioned the possibility that the Federal Reserve could remove management and the board of Bank of America if the bank invoked the MAC clause. I believe it was appropriate for me to explain to Mr. Lewis that the government was supportive of Bank of America and that it felt very strongly that if Bank of America exercised the MAC clause, that would show a colossal lack of judgment and would jeopardize Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and the financial system. It was also appropriate for me to remind him that under such circumstances, the Federal Reserve could invoke its authority to remove management and the board of Bank of America. I intended my message to reinforce the strong view that had been expressed by the Fed and which was shared by the Treasury, that it would be unthinkable that Bank of America take this destructive action. Third, the suggestion has been made that I discouraged Mr. Lewis from making required disclosures to the public markets about losses at Merrill Lynch. That simply did not happen, and Mr. Lewis has denied it unambiguously in testimony before this committee. I would like to conclude with what is most prominent in my recollection of the events of last fall. What I recall most vividly is a nation faced with the threat of an unparalleled economic crisis and the efforts of the men and women from both the public and private sectors who worked hard to steer our nation away from that precipice. It was my privilege to work with them, and I am proud of what we have accomplished. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr.